Ecology Review 1 because we ended with Ecology, but I wasn't able to test on it on time. A number of people were absent, and it's been about a week. So I'm going to take this initial week to make sure that everybody understands the ecology, that you have a little bit more background, and hopefully I'll help you out with the AP exam. And this is the last official unit of the AP exam. So we did cover it in class, but I just want to support that knowledge a little bit more. So I'm going to go to present. And this will also be on YouTube if you want to go back and look at it. Okay. There we go. Share my screen, and here's our review. So the topics in this review, we're going to look at responses to the environment. We did this with animal behavior, energy flow through the ecosystem, population ecology, and the effective density on populations. And this is going in alignment with the curriculum and exam description for the AP Bio, but it's also covering things that were in ECE. So science practices, we're going to identify experimental procedures that are aligned to the question, including identifying dependent and independent animal behavior labs. We did this as a formal lab, I believe. No, we didn't do this as a formal lab this year. We just did this as a lab. Virtual lab as well. Relationship between experimental results and biological concepts. That's the dissolved oxygen lab we did on PH School. Constructing a graph, plot, or chart. That's logistic and exponential. And performing calculations, which we had a bunch. So our math here was exponential growth model and logistic growth model. There's also the Simpson Index, but that's going to be in the next lecture. So responses to the environment, we focused on animal behaviors, so things like fixed action patterns, imprinting, classical conditioning, operant learning, just to name a few. If you don't remember them, please review your animal behavior notes from class. Here, I'm going to just focus on how a particular behavior increases an organism's fitness or its ability to survive and reproduce. So the Darwinian model of fitness. So we're always, remember, looking at our proximate cause, the immediate cause of behavior. So we use the example of the geese. During the critical developmental stage, the young geese observe their mom moving away, and they imprint on them. And the ultimate cause, the evolutionary cause of behavior, is because if they follow their mother, they're going to get more care, they're going to get more learning, they have a greater chance of surviving, and therefore their genes will be passed on to the next generation. So organisms change in their environment through behavior or physiological mechanisms. So beyond just the animals, we're going to talk a little bit about taxis and kinesis with animals and nocturnal and diurnal, but also things in plants, such as photoperiodism and phototropism in plants. We did mention this at the beginning of the unit in ecology, okay? So some examples, Drosophila sap behavior, that was the lab that we did. Any of the virtual animal behavior labs as well would go over this. And this would be an example of an FRQ. This was done on a bombat. Okay, this was a few years ago. So you can see here, they're asking you to describe the cycle of activity, 3 factors that could affect it physiologically or behaviorally, and then proposing a hypothesis, you've seen that science practice, and describing a controlled experiment. Important that it's a controlled experiment. This is going to want to see control groups, 3 constant variables, be specific, a general idea of a lab that you could do. You're not giving specific steps for a lab, just a general setup, right? And there's plenty of examples like this online that have been released that you can look at. You do not need to know the organism, all right? So in plants, we talked about this as photoperiodism. So light, we initially thought, determined when plants flower. And so we named them short day plants and long day plants, but it's really a critical night period. So in a plant that needs a long night, which is over here, this flipped the other way, it's going to need plants that need a long night. If it's interrupted by light, they're not going to flower. And long day plants need a short night. And if that's interrupted, they're not going to flower. Taxis versus kinesis. Taxis, we talked about, is a directed movement away or toward a stimulus. You see that here. So the example we used in class with rheotaxis. So it's directing toward the current. Whereas kinesis is a random movement until it reaches a stimulus. And that's what we see here with the pill bug or cell bug. It's randomly moving from a dry area to a moist area under the leaf because it needs that in order to stay alive. And then nocturnal and diurnal activity. Nocturnal, I think everybody knows, is being active at night and sleeping during the day. It's one of the reasons sugar gliders, despite being super cute, make bad pets. And diurnal are active during the day, but they sleep at night. So that's why you don't see squirrels at night very often. Organisms are going to exchange that information with one another, and they're going to respond to internal changes or external cues, and that can change their behavior. So fight or flight response, that can be external, but you're also getting internal cues. Predator warnings, and then we don't want to just focus on animals, plants responding to herbivory. So our fight or flight response here, we have your very primitive brain here is going to be reacting to the threat, right? And you have a sympathetic response. We talked about this is not good for you because your heart's pounding, your muscles tense, and you're not using that frontal lobe, right? You're kind of getting cortisol, your whole sympathetic nervous system is working. Predator warnings, these are warnings that the predator takes from its own personal experience through trial and error learning. Okay, so hopefully you remember trial and error learning. And this is aposematic coloration. These are the warning colors that warn predators that an organism is going to be poisonous or taste foul, so that they avoid that. And then response to herbivore, you have toxins like urushiol, and then we have, and that's in poison ivy that you see here, leaves folding to make them unappealing to herbivores. And then there's this video that I think does a nice job from a couple students at Cornell. I'm just going to show you part of it. So. All right, so I recommend going and looking that if you're not comfortable with different plant responses to herbivory. They do a nice job explaining the 3 different types, and it only takes about 8 minutes. Okay, individuals connect on information and communicate it to others. A signal is a stimulus that causes a change in behavior, and it's the basis of animal communication. And we had studied the example of the Belding squirrels, and the male squirrels, as they get older, they get farther and farther from the nest, part of kin selection. So they're really this altruistic behavior, if you remember, was even though they might die, the individuals back at the nest shared similar genes for them. So their genes are getting passed on to the next generation, right? But they give this warning cry, which is a signal to tell the other Belding squirrels there is a predator, and so they can get back to hopefully the nest in time. Unfortunately, you can see that it does decrease the lifespan of the male Belding squirrels. Some other types of signals, there's always different chemical signals, and one example is a pheromone, as emitted by members of one species, affects members of the other species. We talked about the termites, and they can follow like a red big pen because it smells like a pheromone for them, and the warning pheromones in fish. Visual signals, these can be things like warning flashes in mockingbirds' wings, but they could also be courtship behaviors, like the blue-footed booby. And so it uses that courtship behavior, that courtship dance, to say, okay, I'm ready to mate. Right? And it's an important signal for them, and it helps them successfully reproduce and pass on their genes. Again, Darwinian fitness. Tactile is touch, so the male fruit fly that taps the female fruit fly. Okay, and then auditory, screeching of a blue jay or song of a warbler, courtship songs here we're seeing again, right? So the idea behind these behaviors, often we're going to see, is going to always go back to evolutionary fitness. So here's an example of a visual signal. This is the finding food, and honeybees communicate the distance and the direction of food. So the round dance here, that's the food is near. The waggle dance, which you've probably heard of, that is actually telling that the food is distant, and it's giving also the angle of where the food is, so that the bees will have more food, increase survival, increase passing on genes. Okay, signals can change behavior. They're the result of differential reproductive success. That should be ARE up there. So things like territorial markings, male mammals will mark their territory. The proximate cause, they don't have to compete. For instance, mates, food, habitat, etc. Ultimate cause, it increases, again, their individual fitness, that inclusive fitness, the number of offspring that survive. Plants also have signals to increase their reproductive success. Coloration in scent and flowers. These evolved about 100 million years ago. The initial flowers were kind of dull, pale yellow to green. There's a really good documentary about them. And then your flowers start to get coloration. That is to bring certain pollinators to them. So that'll increase the chance of cross-pollinating with the same species. So red hummingbirds, white flowers for bats, sweet scents attract bees and flies. And this is a good example of coevolution between the pollinators and the flowers. Some signals, they create social stability for things like cooperative behavior. Okay, so we can see signals that indicate dominance. I like the example of the wolf pack. So here you can see the alpha wolf is putting its head on another subordinate wolf's neck. Okay, and it does that because it's going to be in charge to keep that social stability, and it lets them then coordinate their activities like hunting. That increases the individual fitness. It also increases the population survival because they're working together to get a job done, to get the food that they need. There's a lot of other examples, predator warning calls, swarming behaviors of insects. If you've ever seen, for instance, somebody goes into a bee's nest or something, all the bees come out and swarm, schooling behavior in herds, okay? All right, the next one we did with ecosystems, but it is the next one on the curriculum exam description. So this is the energy flow through the ecosystem. Science practice, you have to explain relationships between experimental results and larger biological concepts, processes, or theories. So I can see this being done by looking at the dry mass, for instance, in a plant, and then looking at the dry mass in the plant after it's been eaten. You could also see something like the energy transfer lab we did. Another one would be the dissolved oxygen lab with the primary productivity versus net productivity. Those would be good examples of how that could be brought the science practice in with content knowledge. So here we can see we have our producers. Those are going to be either photosynthetic, those can be things like plants, also cyanobacteria, algae. So they're capturing light energy and turning it into usable chemical energy. And then in our deep sea vents, we have bacteria. They're taking this hydrogen sulfide and they're combining it, it's creating this chemical energy, okay, that can then be used to make carbohydrates. It doesn't always require oxygen. That's important to know. Okay. So then that energy goes to your first order consumers, which are your herbivores. Then you have your second order consumers. Those are usually your omnivores. And your third order consumers, your carnivores. All along the way, heat is being lost, right? So it's not getting as much energy. What's often not included in some food webs is the decomposers or your detrivores, because they eat at every level. Okay, so they are, and those can be your fungi and your bacteria. Okay, so again, your autotrophs, so you're capturing energy from physical or chemical sources in the environment. They're setting the energy budget for the community. So change in their number affects the number and size of other trophic levels and population size. There are two types of autotrophs. We have photoautotrophs. Those are going to capture light energy, and they're going to turn it into chemical energy. A change in the sunlight, remember, impacts the other trophic levels. We talked about the fact if you're closer to the equator, you're going to have more photosynthesis. And then we see as you get away from the equator, there's less photosynthesis, and that impacts the other trophic levels, and it impacts the biodiversity of your community. Chemoautotrophs, those capture inorganic molecules. They oxidize them to produce energy without necessarily having oxygen needed. Okay, so it's not always necessary to have that oxygen. Heterotrophs, they are going to capture the energy in the carbon compounds. And the energy transfer, we go with the 10% rule. About 10% of the energy goes from one level to the next, but it can range from 5 to 20%. Okay, so they're metabolizing your organic macromolecules, your carbohydrates, which have 4 kilocalories of energy per gram, lipids, which also have 9 kilocalories of energy per gram, and then proteins, which have 4 kilocalories per gram. And they do that by hydrolysis. Remember, adding water to break their covalent bonds. What do organisms use the energy for? They're going to use it to maintain organization, including repair. They're going to use it for growth, and they're going to use it for reproduction, because in order to maintain order, you always have to be putting energy in. And then we have some organisms like us, endotherms, right? Endo-interior. We need that energy for thermal energy from metabolism. So it helps maintain our body temperature. It means we have to eat a lot more, but evolutionary advantage of it, we can live in colder climates. So it gives us more ecological niches to use. Ectotherms, they lack that efficiency and internal mechanisms for maintaining body temperature, so they have to do it through behavior. So if they're too warm, they'll move to the shade. If they're too cold, maybe they'll move to the sun, or they will come together as a group. The one thing we had talked about before was the Q10. So for every 10 degrees Celsius this goes up, the Q10 tells you how much the metabolism increases, because as temperature goes up, remember, you have more kinetic energy of molecules, so they're more likely to bump into enzymes, and enzymes control metabolism. So Q10 of 10, sorry, not of 10, Q10 of 2 would double your rate of metabolism. You're not going to have anything as high as 10. Okay. Different reproductive strategies. This can depend on resource availability. For instance, birds, we talked about, have fewer eggs if there's less food available. They'll have a smaller clutch size. And also life histories. So that's what affects the organism's reproduction and survival. And this is due to evolution as well. And there's 3 variables we're going to look at. Age of sexual maturity. So how quickly do they grow up? How often do the organisms reproduce? And the number of offspring they have when they reproduce. So 2 that we talked about, semelparity and iteroparity. Semelparity is a big bang reproduction. You grow up fairly quick, have lots of offspring, and you usually die. A good example are these salmon here. Iteroparity, repeated reproduction, but you have a few offspring over the course of your lifetime. Often they're larger, more stable environment, and you're going to see much more parental care. This is really not getting parental care with semelparity, but iteroparity, parental care. And then K selection versus R selection. K selected species, that's like us, you have high prenatal care, low birth numbers, good survival of the young, and they're density dependent. So their biotic factors are really going to affect them, okay? are selected, you can think of things like cockroaches or moths. They maximize their reproductive success by having lots of offspring. So they have exponential growth, little to no care, very poor survival, but they have so many offspring that a few will survive. It's just plain, if you have 300 offspring, maybe 10 will survive. And they're density independent. So abiotic factors are affecting them. Okay. So population ecology and the effect of density on populations. So again, we defined a population as a group of the same species living in a given area. And again, I apologize for that. Let me just fix that. I was doing this at 3 a.m, as you can tell. There we go. So the science practice here is to construct a graph, plot, or chart. The math is the potential population growth, the exponential growth, logistic growth models. We did this with the Kaibao case study. There's a virtual population lab, and we looked at human disturbance POGO and how that affects populations as well. So how we can describe a population. Density is the number of individuals in a given area, whereas dispersal is the pattern of spacing. So we have clumped here. They're clumped along a resource. That's the most common. Even with humans, we tend to clump around the coast where water is available. Uniform, these are antagonistic interactions. And then random, that's a little more rare nature. I always like the example of dandelions. It's kind of unpredictable spacing. Survivorship curves. These are the number of individuals alive at each age. So you have type 1. This is the most deaths are after reproductive age. And that's what we see in humans in developed countries. Type 2 is a constant death across their lifetime. That would be our squirrel. And type 3, most of the deaths are early in life. And if you remember, type 1 is also K-selected, and type 3 is also R-selected. So change in our population size is just simply birth minus death, right? D is for delta change, and population over change in time. You could add immigration in here, and you could add emigration, but we're just going to focus on birth minus death. So if it's a positive number, it's a growing population. If it's 0, it's a stable population. And if it's negative, it's a decreasing population. Okay, our population growth models. Exponential growth is under ideal conditions. So the population is going to rapidly expand. It's either going into a new area, so has a new ecological niche, or is recovering, and it's due to a lack of constraints. This isn't sustainable. So here, it's kind of getting used to the area, and then it goes up. So this is our formula, change in population over change in time. This is your Rmax, your growth rate of the population, and this is your population size. All right. So this is the kind of question you would have. So you take your 1.3 here, you take the current population size, 2,500, right? And then you times them, and that tells you how much it's going to grow. Now, if they ask you, well, how large will the population be next year? You would take that number and add it to the original population. Your logistic growth model is going to take in something different. It takes in carrying capacity. This is much more realistic because carrying capacity is the maximum stable population that can be sustained by the environment. There are limiting factors that is going to keep a population from typically going the exponential growth. It can be water, it can be habitat, it can be mates, but there's always some types of limiting factors. And where it starts to level off, that's carrying capacity. So again, it's going to be kind of flat down here because the organisms, the population is getting used to the environment. Exponential, and then when it flattens, it's at carrying capacity. Now it doesn't completely flatten, we talked about it goes up and down along carrying capacity. So here we have a logistic growth. So you're doing the same thing you did with exponential here. We worked on this before. You take the R, you times it by your population, And then you have to see, well, how much can it grow? And that's what this does. So you take carrying capacity minus the population divided by carrying capacity. We have two types of ways that we look at our factors: density dependent factors, population matters. And these tend to be biotic, things like predation, disease, competition. Okay. Density independent factors, population is not a factor. It's going to affect the percent, whether you're a dense population or you're not a dense population. And these are abiotic things like fire, flood, other types of weather events. So I hope that was helpful. Again, this will be on YouTube if you would like to see it there. And I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to go back here. And I would like you to please email me your questions. And then if you want, I can either email you back responses, or you can join me during the office hours and I will try to respond to your questions. Okay? Have a good day.